All right, well, welcome to another edition of uh, Honors World Geography Online. We are kind of now beginning to slow down, or not slow down, that's the wrong word. We're getting close to the end of our segment dealing with industrialization. And what that actually means is if you take a look at the calendar, you actually have a quiz next week. So take a look at that. And when that is, I believe it's Tuesday, but I don't have the calendar in front of me at this very second in time, although I can have the calendar in front of me. Let's see. Cannot find my calendar. Well, anyway, check out your calendar. It's early next week. Why can't I find my calendar? Ah, here we are. So yeah, next Tuesday, right? So next Tuesday we'll do like a little online quiz over just like the industrialization segment to make sure that we're feeling pretty good with. So we talked about deindustrialization yesterday, right? So for countries that have deindustrialized, what do their new economies look like? Well, of course, they're largely service industry dominated, right? Those tertiary industries that we've talked about. And when we talk about service industries, these are industries that don't actually generate an actual tangible product, right? Instead, they encompass a wide range of services that are found in modern societies. So this includes the tertiary sector, but this also includes the quaternary sector, right? The finance, the banking, insurance, legal services, computer services, and the quinary sector, right? Like scientific research, higher ed, high level management, right? In that quinary sector as well. In the core, service industries employ more workers than primary and secondary industries combined, right? And you've seen those numbers already. But it's very wide ranging as this sector can stretch from small scale retailing, like basically working as a cashier in Target, to tourism services, to researching the causes of cancer. All of those jobs that range pretty wide, they all kind of fall into this sector. And in the past 3 decades, both the quaternary and quinary sectors have experienced a lot of rapid growth, especially in the United States and countries like that, like it, and driving the increasing growth is the increasing mechanization of production, the growth of large multinational corporations that we've talked about before, and the dispersal of the production process. Of course, only areas that have industry can deindustrialize. That's important to keep in mind. So at the global scale, the wealthier industries have been the most successful in establishing a post-industrial service economy. Or I should say the wealthier industrial countries have been more successful in establishing a post-industrial economy. So deindustrialization on its own hasn't really done much to change the disparities between the core and the periphery that exists. At the same time, though, as anyone in the Rust Belt of the United States can tell you, not all deindustrialized regions have found their niche in the new service economy. We talked about that, right? We talked about that yesterday, right? When you look at some of these, like, I'm going to flip back. It's just like being right back in my room, right? Not everybody, of course, has this worked out perfectly fine for. Now, move ahead here back to this slide. That said, both the population and the economy of the Sun Belt, which is this area that you see in red here on this map of the United States, both the population and the economy of the Sun Belt has grown over the last few decades as the service sector has basically chosen to locate in areas like Atlanta, like Dallas, where the climate's warmer, where local laws welcome their presence as well. And so this is the area of the U.S. that we've seen really the biggest boom in service economies in recent years. Now, when we're looking at patterns of economic activity in the service sector, it's first of all important to remember that most service industries are not tied to raw materials, right? And so they don't need large amounts of energy available to them. And so those factors are a lot less important, right, for service industries than they are for more traditional industries that we've talked about so far. So how does location theory apply to service industry jobs then? Well, the real thing that you want to be close to when you're involved in the service sector is market, right? Market accessibility is much more relevant for the service sector than other sectors. But even then, advances in telecommunications have rendered even that factor a little bit less important for some types of service industries, right? Look at like the Amazon business model, for example. Also, it's important to keep in mind that tertiary services, whether you're talking about restaurants or whether you're talking about hotels or retail establishments, are most closely tied to population patterns because if they're located far from their consumers, they're not going to really succeed, right? Generally, these tertiary services need to be close to consumers. The precise location of a retail service is going to be dependent on the relationship between cost of operating a business and then the money being brought in. And so business owners, that work in the service sector generally are looking for ways to minimize as much as possible the cost of operation and maximize as possible the amount of revenue coming in. You see this chart here, right? It's called the Loesch model. Really, it's pronounced Lurch, right? It's spelled, it's German. Economic Jaffer that comes up with it. Lurch, L-O, and the O has the two dots over it, that umlaut, right? So it's pronounced like le, right? So the Lurch model, L-O with the two dots, right? The umlaut over it, S-C-H, Loesch model, or Lurch model, technically. That's what you're looking at here on the screen. The concept of this model is actually pretty simple when you're looking at it. Essentially, the area where a service can operate for the lowest cost, you're talking about like rent, right? Or the lowest like cost on a leasing agreement, and can bring in the most customers or the most income. That's the sweet spot, right? The real sweet spot here on this particular screen that you're looking at would be, I'm going to draw just right here. The real sweet spot is going to be, and I can't draw a straight line on my computer, but the real sweet spot's going to be right down the middle there, right? And that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, because that's where you're going to see your highest income and your lowest cost of operation. Now, of course, not all businesses are going to be able to locate exactly on this point due to the availability of land, but business owners are going to want to be as close to this point as possible to be profitable, right? So location does play a role for a certainty in tertiary sector jobs. Now, the locational influences on quaternary and quinary services are a bit more diverse. Many of these industries are footloose, right? We've talked about what that means already, right? Businesses whose locations are not really tied to resources or transportation or consumer locations or whatever, right? So what would be some footloose businesses? Well, retail banking and various types of administrative services generally are going to require a high level of personal contact. And so therefore you really want to locate those near the businesses they're serving, right? Those would not be good example of footloose businesses. But other types of quaternary services like credit card bill processing can operate just about anywhere, right? As long as you've got access to digital processing equipment and high-speed internet, which is why these offices tend to be in places in the United States. Like if you ever look at like a credit card billing statement, a lot of times it's being sent out from an office in Nebraska or one of the Dakotas. And that's because land in those states is so cheap and it doesn't really matter where you put credit card billing services. So you might as well, go for the cheap land. Call centers for technical help for computers are oftentimes located in India and in the Philippines, where there are those with relatively high levels of education that can also provide relatively cheap labor, speak English, and can just route phones through the internet, right? And so, a lot of times call centers are going to, be rather footloose. What matters most in the quaternary sector is infrastructure, right? Having the available, telecommunications networks, right? The high-speed internet, for example, available, and just general infrastructure as a whole in place in order to make your business work. So you want decent infrastructure, a workforce that's sufficiently skilled but not too expensive, and favorable tax rates, right? And that's why a lot of times you'll see, again, call centers in India because it checks a lot of those boxes. On the other hand, your corporate headquarters tend to be in big cities, and tend to prefer to be in large cities if in terms of just like the actual corporate headquarters itself. And well, let's talk about why. There's no such thing as a completely footloose industry because again, there's a number of factors to consider before selecting a location to house a service industry office. If you're talking about setting up a corporate headquarters, a lot of times executives are looking for what they call the quote unquote best fit for their corporate culture. So the language of the workforce is going to be a consideration. The availability of a skilled workforce is going to be a consideration. The education of a workforce is going to be a consideration. Climate and natural environment as well, right? You want to be in a nice area with a nice climate, right? Got to take your clients out golfing, right? Recreational opportunities, entertainment venues, tolerant communities. When you combine all of those factors together, you're left with what we call in geography the cool factor, right? Cities that can check a lot of those boxes that we just talked about, right? Cities like Austin, Texas, cities like Seattle, like Portland, like Vancouver, Toronto, Atlanta, Boston, San Francisco. These are cities that have all shown a collection of these qualities and therefore fall within the cool category. Obviously, this is a very subjective concept, but it's one that a lot of times businesses will look at in terms of where they want to establish their corporate headquarters, right? And especially important is being close to cities or being located in cities where there's just a high level of talented people, high percentage of college educated people, high percentage of scientists, high percentage of professionals. Notice Atlanta ranks pretty high on this on the map. And look at San Francisco, yeah. Look at DC, yeah, pretty high up there in those regards. Now, a lot of times these places that are going to especially attract, more of the high tech corporate culture are known as high technology clusters. A high technology corridor is by definition an area that's been designated by a local or a state government to benefit from lower taxes and high technology infrastructure with the goal of basically providing high tech jobs to the local population. You also, of course, want to be, as we've talked about before this week, near banks that provide investment capital for this, right? A great example of a high tech cluster is Silicon Valley, right, which you're looking at here on the map. Several decades ago, a number of pretty innovative tech companies located their research and development activities, we call R&D, research and development activities, in the area between University of California in Berkeley, which is at the top of your screen here. You'll see Berkeley is right there by Oakland on the East Bay, and also wanting to be near Stanford University. So right, this area kind of, and Stanford's here on the south part of the bay. So several decades ago, what you had was a lot of tech companies wanting to establish themselves between Cal, Berkeley, and Stanford. They were attracted by the prospect of developing links with universities and the prospect of having an availability of very highly educated workers. And then agglomeration kicked in, right, as other high-tech businesses were drawn in to be around others. Specifically, what we call a place like Silicon Valley is we call it a technopole, right? This is an area that was planned for high technology businesses where agglomeration built on synergy amongst technological companies occur. Kind of grandma definition of that. High-tech companies like being around other high-tech companies. They can do a lot of information sharing. Employees tend to bounce around a lot in this particular world. And so, the talent pool is there. The information sharing is there. The money is there. And that's what kind of drives agglomeration in this particular area, like a technopole. You see a very similar technopole that exists outside of Boston. That highlighted red road there, that's Massachusetts 128. Massachusetts Highway 128 is, kind of near Harvard and MIT as you, of course, get into Boston. Land in Boston is very expensive, so kind of this route along 128 kind of makes sense. It's a little bit further outside of the city, but very, very close to, to colleges like MIT and Harvard. dipping into those talent pools. You can find high tech clusters in Washington, D.C.,